Now, David Cameron is due to make a key speech tomorrow on Britain's future in the European Union. So I'm asking you, given all the speculation that there is in the papers, all the what will he say, how will he say it, what should he say? That's what I'm asking you. What should David Cameron say in this landmark speech? Is he expected to call for the UK to get powers back from the European Union? He's even suggested putting Britain's membership to a referendum, but only after the 2015 general election. Labour leader Ed Miliband says the Prime Minister is taking the country to the brink of an economic cliff. So I ask you, what should, in this landmark speech on Europe, what should David Cameron say? 08453 009956. Got an all-star lineup of guests for you to talk this through. We've got Gisela Stewart. Gisela is the Conservative, there's a slip of the tongue, the Labour MP for Edgbaston. Hello, Gisela.
Good morning, Adrian.
Oh, you're Freudian, some might say. I don't know. And you're
How dare you, Adrian?
You're interesting because you are that rare beast. You are a Labour MP who has questioned our ongoing commitment to the European Union.
Well, I think I'm probably more scarred by having spent years negotiating what then became the Lisbon Treaty, and I think that may be a reason for that. And you see, what I can't understand is David Cameron is going to give this speech tomorrow, not because he actually wants anything to say. He's cornered himself into an impossible position, and now he's trying to make a good fist out was really a bad job. And you see, even if we did do nothing, the European Union or those who've got a single currency are going to fundamentally change the way they operate. And David Cameron will have to give some idea of what he thinks those countries who are not part of the single currency but wish to be part of a European Union framework, what that would look like. And that requires new institutions. And I haven't heard a word from him that he's got any kind of vision of what our continued membership of the EU, but outside the single currency, will look like.
So if the single currency continues, and the indications are for the moment at least that it will, you might, for example, have common banking rules across the EU, which Britain might say, well, nothing to do with us, we want to opt out of that. At the moment, it's quite difficult for Britain to say that, isn't it? Because we're seen as part of one big club.
Well, at the moment, you've got 17 countries who are part of the single currency, and I think by next year, after the German, by the end of this year, after the German election, where at the moment everybody's just holding things together because they feel they have to, that may not be 17 anymore. I mean, Cyprus is in deep crisis, and we just don't hear about it. But there will be a number of countries who will have a single currency, and it'll require a economic government in Brussels which will be strong enough to tell big countries as well as small ones what they can and cannot do. And we are not part of that, but we also at the moment have no influence over what that core does. And that means we're kind of isolated and on the edge of things unless we come up with something constructive.
OK, well, what should David Cameron say then, Keith?
Well, I think what he will have to say is that the current EU institutions don't provide for members who are inside the euro properly and those who are not and don't wish to either. So it actually requires a real institutional relooking as to how the voting goes, who makes the decisions, how the commissioners work. So it's a really fundamental thing, and he has not said a single word so far, which makes me think that he started to think about it.
Steve McCabe is the Labour MP for Selly Oak. Steve, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Yeah, so what should David Cameron say tomorrow?
Well, I'm not sure it matters too much what he says because he'll never satisfy the competing demands. I think I'm with Gisela, he's boxed into a corner. But I think she's broadly right. I mean, he has to try and define how you're a member of a club without being a member of the Euro part of the club. But actually, I don't think that's what's driven the speech. I think anybody who saw Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday knows that what's driving the speech is his own right wing.
Well, nevertheless, I mean, he may be under pressure from his own right wing who don't want, close ties with Europe and want to get some of the powers back from the European Union. But that's his problem, Steve. It's of interest to every listener in the West Midlands. So I'm asking you what you would do. What can we say? Because for many people listening to this, Steve, we have a problematic relationship with the European Union. People feel that there are too many powers vested in Brussels. Not everybody, but some people do. People also understand the value of trade with Europe to a region like Birmingham, like the Black Country. So how are we going to negotiate our way through these tricky waters?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I think if you ask the British public what they want right now, I think all of these issues don't really grab their attention. What they want is the right to say, are we going to be in or out? That's the referendum they want. And in a sense, that's the referendum that David Cameron alluded to giving them. He's now got himself a further layer of difficulty because he's got to kind of define the sort of role that he thinks he can carve out for Britain within this institution. I don't know if he can do it, is my honest opinion.
Do you think we should be allowed, if what you say is true, Steve, that most people in this country want a referendum, do you think we should be allowed to have that referendum sooner rather than later?
Well, actually, I personally do. I realise that there'll be umpteen of my colleagues will quite understandably tell me about all the dangers that poses, the threat to business and investment, and the danger of making the decision before all these long, protracted negotiations. But I personally think the real judgment that has to happen in this country is, are we in or out? And I think that's what the folk I speak to in the street are telling me. Interesting.
Steve, stay there if you would. We'll come back to you and Geezer as well. Nikki Sinclaire is an independent member of the European Parliament for the West Midlands. There you go, Nikki. Steve McCabe, Labour MP for Selly Oak, saying that he supports the idea of an in-out referendum on Europe.
Right, well, Adrian, let me correct you, because I've been a We Demand a Referendum Party MP for quite a while now, so I'm no longer an independent MEP.
Okay.
It's fantastic to hear Stephen Gazila call for an in or out referendum, but the fact is, as with individual MPs, they like to talk tough, but their parties do absolutely nothing. We all remember the Blair promise of a referendum that never materialised, and I agree with them that Cameron has boxed himself into a corner. He's got to produce some type of Houdini magic trick tomorrow, but I fear he'll just become Tommy Cooper.
Well, listen, Nikki, it's very easy to call for a referendum, isn't it? But we've heard in the course of this week on this programme, people as eminent as Peter Matthews of Black Country Metals saying that if we have a referendum, it could affect trade and industry here in the West Midlands, because people want to know if they're placing orders and they're looking to build relationships down the line. They don't want Britain to have a big question mark over the terms of trade that it will be doing with other countries in Europe, hanging over it for a number of years.
Absolutely. And, I heard that programme last week and I heard that particular call. Incidentally, the BBC has now used that company 4 times. Most businesses, Federation of Small Businesses in the last European election actually called for no more EU legislation. Small businesses employ about 83% of jobs within the UK. And they, by a large part of small businesses that I meet, want a referendum and want to sort our relationship out with the European Union. Preferably, a lot of them would like to leave. But, what I've changed since I've been an MEP, when I became an MEP, I just wanted to leave and I didn't care how we left. Now, after being there 3 years, I can see how disastrous our relationship is in this halfway house. We're neither fully in or fully out, which is a bit what Gazila was saying. We need to make a decision. There's a fork in the road now, and we need to go one way or the other. And I think that the people, because the politicians, as I've said, from all the political parties have failed us in the last 30, 40 years on this issue.
Gisela, let me put that point to Gisela, because Gisela, it's Ed Miliband put in a sterling performance in the House of Commons, had fun mocking David Cameron, saying, I'm glad to see you've put all these problems behind you, ho, 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 with your backbenchers. But David Cameron made the point that many of the problems that people in the country perceive to have with the European Union date back to treaties that were signed by the Labour Party.
And there's always a parties when they're in government and have to negotiate and go, they behave different than when they're in opposition, because that's your role. You hold the government's feet to the fire. So if you go over the last 40 years, you could have switched positions between Labour and Conservative in various decades and have different views. The biggest single European act was actually signed by Margaret Thatcher,
the Maastricht Treaty.
But the thing is, the real key question is, do we think our democratic institutions anchor in the nation states, or do we think that the world has moved on and big supranational institutions are the answer? And that's the debate the United Kingdom in many ways never had, because we are comfortable with the nation state, and many of the Europeans have seen that fail in their history, in their living memory. And whenever I think you'll have a referendum, I think we will have to have one. We have to give people a real option, and that's why I wouldn't call for in or out now, because nobody knows what the out actually means.
So you support David Cameron's point of view that we have to sort of get to a position where the euro is sort of settled down, and we organise a possible repatriation of some powers from Europe, and then we can offer a real choice to the British people.
Adrian?
Yeah.
But President Schulz of the European Parliament, in a press conference yesterday, said renegotiation is not possible. And I don't often agree with President Schulz, but I absolutely agree with him. To get any real negotiation of a treaty, you have to have unanimity. You have to have all 26 other member states agree to a treaty trade. And that simply isn't going to happen. Why would Greece, Spain or Ireland allow more powers to go back to the UK, less British taxpayers' money coming to their countries? They simply will not agree to that. The only way is for us is to repatriate our powers, is to repower the British people and allow them to demand the referendum. And if the other parties don't do it, they can save it in European elections in 2014.
Steve McCabe.
Yes, Adrian. Well, I think this is just going to go round and round. I don't think you can win on this anymore, which is why I say we should just have it decided one way or t'other. I mean, if we say there's going to be a referendum but at some point in the future, that just means that the speculation and the uncertainty continues. I mean, Gisela's right. People have to make a decision. Personally, I'm in favour of a looser federation that does actually have some of the benefits of working together economically on things like justice agreements and crime and terrorism. But I'm not desperate to have a supra-state where everything is governed by people thousands of miles away. I don't think that's going to work in this country, and I think we've seen the hostility that's built up already. So, I think we just need to get this over and done with and decide we're either in this and therefore we've got to make it work as best we can, or we're out of it and we'll have to take the consequences of that, whatever they are. And I think that, I just think that's where people are now. I think it's going on too long.
Steve, great to hear from you. Thank you, Steve McCabe, the Labour MP for Selly Oak. Thanks also to the MEP for the West Midlands, Nikki Sinclaire, and also to Gisela Stewart, the Labour MP.